Hello, weary traveler of history. Tonight, we slip quietly through the velvet curtains of time into a glittering world of powdered faces, and gilded lies the court of Queen Elizabeth I. The torches are burning low, their smoke curling lazily against the painted ceilings of Whitehall Palace. Candles flicker in golden sconces, their light trembling against faces that shine not from youth or health, but from lead and powder beauty, built upon poison. The air is thick, sweet, and faintly sickly, heavy with the perfumes of rose, ambergris, and musk. Beneath it all lingers another smell, the sour trace of sweat, candle grease, and human breath trapped under silk and lace. It is the late 16th century, and you are surrounded by courtiers, men and women who glide like living statues, their faces pale as porcelain, their smiles stiff beneath layers of white ceruse and crimson rouge. Their jewels sparkle like frost, and their hair, powdered and perfumed, catches the dim light like strands of fire. Yet beneath this beauty lies something darker, a quiet decay that not even gold or perfume can hide. Each bow, each whispered compliment, each carefully choreographed movement conceals a desperate truth. The pursuit of perfection is killing them. And at the heart of this glittering illusion stands the Virgin Queen herself, Elizabeth Tudor, the woman who ruled an empire and crafted her image into something almost divine. Her skin was said to glow with a celestial paleness, her hair a halo of red gold, her presence as radiant as the dawn. To her subjects, she was not simply a queen, but a symbol, the very embodiment of power, purity, and grace. Yet the perfection they adored was a mask, painted daily with the deadliest ingredients known to her world. Behind the gleam of her white face lay years of careful artifice, lead ground to powder, vinegar mixed to a sharp caustic paste, mercury brushed across lips and cheeks to bring life to skin already withering beneath its touch. Her beauty was her crown, her armor, and her curse a fragile illusion that came at a terrible cost. The courtiers around her followed eagerly, painting their faces in her image, each stroke of powder a silent tribute to their queen. Together they built a world of appearances, a kingdom that smelled of roses and death, where the sweetest scent in the room could hide the slow ruin of flesh beneath it. So tonight, as the candles burn low and your thoughts drift toward sleep, we'll wander into that shimmering world of Elizabethan beauty where fashion met folly and vanity met its quiet, fatal end. The powders, the perfumes, the rituals that defined an age, all crafted in pursuit of eternal grace, all steeped in invisible poison. So dim your light, settle in, and let's wander through a time when beauty could kill and yet everyone chased it anyway. If you enjoy exploring these strange, sleepy corners of history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now close your eyes and listen. The scent of the past is rising. The obsession with pale skin, the flickering light of the court, never slept. Even when the sun sank behind the misty banks of the Thames, the glow of candles, torches, and hearth fires painted the faces of England's most powerful with a strange, otherworldly light. It was in that dim radiance that pale skin became the truest currency of beauty and status, and the people of Queen Elizabeth's England began to chase whiteness, as if it were salvation itself. You can almost picture it, the courtiers gliding through the great hall of Whitehall Palace, faces shining white as bone, necks and hands dusted in powder so fine that it caught the air like drifting snow. Beneath their ruffs and jewels, they looked less like men and women, and more like ghosts pretending to live. In the late 16th century, to have pale skin was to be seen as noble, clean, divine, and untouched by labor. The pale glow of the skin was not merely fashionable. It was a language of class, a silent proclamation of who belonged above and who toiled below. Out in the fields, peasants bent under the sun, their skin bronzed and darkened by honest work. In the eyes of the court, that darkness was a mark of earthiness, even sin the physical stain of labor and exposure. But to the nobles, the absence of color, the bloodless white of untouched flesh, was a sign of purity. It meant you were above the soil, above sweat, above the chaos of ordinary life. Pale skin, like silk or silver, became something to be displayed, proof that one's time was spent under painted ceilings and not beneath the cruel working sun. Elizabeth herself became the living embodiment of this ideal. Her fair complexion, already pale by nature, was transformed into legend. Poets compared her to the moon, calling her face the mirror of heaven, the light of England. Portraits exaggerated her whiteness until she looked almost luminous, a living statue of purity. But behind the poetry and the paintbrushes lay a darker truth. This obsession with whiteness was not born of beauty, but of fear. In an age haunted by disease and moral decay, pale skin suggested health, chastity, and even divine favor. To appear flushed or discolored was to invite suspicion of illness, corruption, or sin. And so, every morning before the queen greeted her court, a ritual began. Servants brought bowls of vinegar and small pots of powder, the precious Venetian ceruse, imported from Italy, gleaming white like crushed pearls. The mixture was deceptively simple: white lead, vinegar, and sometimes a dash of chalk or egg white. It promised to turn any face into alabaster perfection. When applied to the skin, it gave a smooth, flawless appearance that hid every imperfection, every freckle, every mark of time. But beneath the illusion, the poison worked its slow ruin. The lead seeped through the skin, tightening it at first, giving it that glassy texture so admired in portraits. But day by day, it began to corrode. The skin would dry, crack, and peel. Beneath the mask of purity, sores bloomed like bruised flowers, impossible to heal. And yet, the queen persisted. To appear without her white mask was unthinkable. To show her natural skin would have been to reveal vulnerability, and a queen could never afford that. Her courtiers followed suit, their own faces coated with lead, their own pores suffocating beneath layers of powder and paint. The women of the court, desperate to mimic her moonlight glow, painted themselves until their flesh no longer resembled flesh at all. The more they suffered, the more beautiful they were believed to be. The price of this perfection was silent but merciless. Lead poisoned the blood and the bones. It caused tremors, paralysis, and madness. Some women lost their hair, others their teeth. Their complexions, once pale, began to turn gray, and their bodies grew weak. But the powder remained their salvation. To be seen without it was to lose status, respect, and perhaps even favor at court. Beauty had become a sickness, and everyone was infected. In that world, the mirror was both friend and enemy. The queen would sit before hers each morning as her maids carefully smoothed the paste onto her face, layering poison upon poison until her reflection was no longer human, but divine. They say she loved the transformation, the way the pale paint erased fatigue and sorrow, the way it hardened her features into the face of a monarch who could not age, could not falter, could not die. In truth, Elizabeth was crafting something larger than beauty. She was building an image, a weapon. Her pale face became her power, her crown made of skin and illusion. And soon, the rest of England followed her example. Even outside the palace walls, in the merchant towns and among the rising middle class, women began to chase this deadly whiteness. Apothecaries and traveling salesmen sold small pots of powder to anyone who could afford them. Recipes spread by word of mouth: grind chalk and vinegar, mix with honey, Add a touch of arsenic for brilliance. Each mixture promised radiance, and each carried its own quiet death. There were stories whispered of women whose faces blistered and blackened, of others who lost their sight from mercury fumes. But still they painted, because beauty was worth the risk, and because the queen herself was the example of endurance through artifice. The men of the age were no less vain. Courtiers powdered their faces too, some even painting faint blue veins upon their temples to mimic the translucent skin of nobility. To look robust, tanned, or earthy was shameful. It suggested you had worked with your hands. No, the court wanted faces like ivory and hands as soft as butter. Even in portraits, artists were instructed to exaggerate the whiteness of the skin, to make their subjects glow with unnatural light, untouched by the mortal world. And beneath all this, something remarkable happened. Whiteness itself became a metaphor. It was not just about beauty, it was about moral virtue, about power and distance from the ordinary. To be pale was to be clean, godly, disciplined. It was an illusion of control in a world that had very little of it. Disease, war, and hunger were constant threats. The whiteness of skin became a fragile armor against the darkness of reality. Of course, not everyone was fooled. Some writers mocked the trend, noting how the fair ladies of court looked more like ghosts than women. Others pointed out the hypocrisy, that beneath their noble whiteness, many suffered from sores, bad breath, and trembling hands. But such truths were not welcome in a court ruled by appearances. Beauty was the language of power, and power could not afford honesty. As the years passed, Elizabeth's skin grew more fragile, and her reliance on cosmetics deepened. Her once natural pallor turned mottled from years of lead use, and yet she doubled the layers, painting herself into an eternal portrait. Her image became so iconic that it outlived the woman herself. To this day, her portraits show not the frail body of a woman poisoned by her own beauty, but a flawless, radiant queen, a ghost wrapped in silk and pride. So when you imagine the Elizabethan court, remember that the light of those candles reflected off more than jewels and silk. It shimmered off powdered faces, off the pale sheen of lead, off the illusion of beauty so powerful it outlasted the flesh it destroyed. The obsession with pale skin was not simply vanity. It was survival in a world where appearance meant everything. To be pale was to be powerful. To be pale was to be pure. To be pale was to belong. And yet, under the surface of that white mask, history whispers the truth, that every empire, every face of power, hides a little poison beneath its paint. The deadly white lead foundation. The pale faces of Elizabeth's court shimmered under the candlelight, like polished marble, serene and flawless from afar. But if you stood closer, the illusion began to tremble. Under the soft gleam of beeswax and oil lamps, what appeared as perfection was really a fragile crust, a mask painted with danger. The secret behind that spectral beauty was known as Venetian ceruse, the deadliest cosmetic of its age. And though every lady at court used it, none used it more faithfully or more fatally than the queen herself. You can almost picture the scene each morning in the queen's private chambers. The winter light barely filters through the oiled parchment of the windows, a pale, ghostly glow that matches the skin of the woman it touches. Elizabeth sits before her mirror, a rare luxury in those days, and her maids move about like shadows, carrying small bowls of liquid, cloths, and ivory-handled brushes. The room smells faintly of vinegar and roses, a combination that hides the sharper, metallic tang of the ingredients that will soon grace her skin. The Venetian ceruse is brought forward in a delicate glass jar. It looks harmless, even lovely white as snow, with a faint luster, smooth to the touch. It was said to be the finest cosmetic in all of Europe, imported from Venice and favored by queens and courtesans alike. Yet within that jar lies a quiet death. Powdered white lead mixed with vinegar, forming a soft, creamy paste that promised to erase every blemish and every trace of life beneath it. The mixture was applied with almost religious reverence. The first thin layer turned the skin pale and cold, as if it had been carved from alabaster. Another layer followed, and then another, until the woman's natural color disappeared entirely. The pores were sealed shut, the skin smoothed into unnatural perfection. Elizabeth's maids, careful and practiced, brushed it down her neck and across her hands, blending it seamlessly with her powdered chest. When they were finished, she no longer looked like a mortal woman. She looked like an icon, distant, immaculate, untouchable. But beneath the beauty, the poison began its work. Lead, once absorbed through the skin, did not leave the body easily. It accumulated in the bones, in the blood, in the very organs that kept one alive. Slowly, silently, it corroded from within. The skin beneath the paint grew dry and gray. Small fissures opened, weeping sores that no amount of powder could truly hide. The queen complained of aching limbs, of fatigue and strange dizziness, but to appear without her ceruse, to expose her natural skin, would have been unthinkable. She was not merely a woman. She was England itself, embodied in flesh. The Virgin Queen, eternal and divine, and divinity could not be seen with flaws. The irony was cruel. The very cosmetic meant to preserve beauty was destroying it. The paste burned when applied to broken skin, yet the courtiers persisted, layering more of it to hide the damage caused by the last application. It became a cycle of decay: paint, crack, cover, repeat. Faces became stiff and expressionless, their beauty brittle as porcelain. When the lady smiled, faint lines of gray appeared in the creases. When they cried, the tears carried streaks of poison down their cheeks. But they laughed about it in whispers, pretending not to see the ruin underneath. The court was a theater, and everyone was an actor playing their part beneath a mask of death. Venetian ceruse was expensive, so expensive that its possession alone became a mark of wealth. Merchants sold it in tiny pots for a fortune, promising the radiance of queens. The formula was simple enough that apothecaries and ambitious women began to make their own grinding white lead in vinegar until it formed a paste, sometimes adding chalk, sometimes egg whites, sometimes powdered pearls. The result was always the same: a temporary illusion followed by pain. There were warnings even then. Physicians spoke of lead sickness, of trembling hands and fainting spells, of teeth falling loose and skin darkening to gray. But such warnings were easily dismissed. In a world ruled by appearance, truth was often less valuable than beauty. And beauty, in the Elizabethan age, was politics. The queen's face, that luminous, pale mask, was not just vanity. It was a statement of power. It told her people that she was above them, untouched by the filth of the world, pure as snow and strong as marble. Her whiteness was a kind of propaganda, a visual declaration of divine right. And if the price for that perfection was suffering, then so be it. The queen could not falter. She could not be seen as mortal. Those who saw her from afar spoke of her radiance, of how her skin seemed to glow like moonlight. But those who served her closely, the maids who applied the ceruse, the physicians who tended her ailments, saw what others did not. They saw the sores hidden beneath her jawline, the scabs at her temples, the cracked lips concealed by rouge. They saw the trembling hands, the moments of weakness that Elizabeth worked so hard to hide. And still, she commanded them to bring her more powder, more lead, more poison, to rebuild her illusion each morning. Over the years, the effects deepened. Her skin, once naturally fair, grew mottled and uneven, forcing her to rely more heavily on her makeup. Her hair began to thin, prompting her to adopt elaborate wigs. Her teeth, already blackened by her fondness for sweets, worsened with the effects of lead poisoning. Yet the portraits painted of her in those years tell another story, one of unchanging, ageless beauty. Her face, white and unblemished, shines from the canvas like an eternal sun. It was propaganda in paint. The Virgin Queen, forever young, forever perfect, forever England. In truth, Elizabeth had become her own creation, a living portrait maintained by sheer will and dangerous chemistry. She could never let the mask slip. It was said that she even slept with a touch of ceruse still on her skin, refusing to be seen barefaced by her attendants. The line between her real face and her painted one blurred, until even she may not have known where one ended and the other began. Among her courtiers, imitation became a kind of devotion. Noble women and ambitious ladies layered the same deadly foundation upon their faces, declaring their loyalty in powder and pain. To be pale was to be like the queen, pure, regal, chosen. They boasted of their smooth complexions, ignoring the sores that bloomed beneath their collars. Servants whispered of ladies fainting during feasts, their painted faces cracking under the heat of the hall fires. But still, the next morning, the powders returned, and the cycle continued. Sometimes, when the court was quiet and the air still, a maid might see the queen at her mirror, studying her reflection with unreadable eyes. The candlelight would soften the harsh lines of her face, and for a moment, the illusion held she looked as serene and unchanging as ever. But the mirror, cruel and honest, did not lie. Beneath the white veneer, she could see the faint cracks, the tiredness around her eyes, the faint gray shadow beneath her jaw. And perhaps, for a heartbeat, she knew the truth that the very thing that made her powerful was consuming her from within. But she would never stop. For Elizabeth, beauty was not mere vanity, it was survival. The mask was her crown, her armor, and her throne. Without it, she was just a woman, aging, vulnerable, mortal, and queens could not afford to be mortal. The courtiers believed they were honoring her by mirroring her appearance. In truth, they were sharing her curse. Venetian ceruse spread through noble houses like perfume, a silent epidemic. The laughter at court grew thinner, the faces whiter, the eyes dimmer. Some said you could smell the metal in the air, a faint sweetness that clung to the skin, mingling with rosewater and sweat. It was the scent of slow death, disguised as elegance. There were moments, though, when the facade cracked, when a lady's face would redden and peel, or when faint gray lines appeared beneath the powder. The solution, of course, was more ceruse. The cure for the poison was the poison itself. So they painted and powdered and smiled, even as their bodies trembled and their blood darkened. Years later, when Elizabeth was gone and her personal effects catalogued, the jars of white powder found among her belongings told their own story. Venetian ceruse, stored carefully in ornate containers, still gleamed with deadly purity. Some of those jars, now held in museums, bear silent witness to the strange paradox of her age, that beauty and decay could exist side by side, indistinguishable under candlelight. And so, the deadly white foundation lived on in art, in legend, and in the slow echo of every pale portrait that bears her likeness. It is strange to think that what made her immortal in history was the very thing that destroyed her in life. The face that ruled an empire was painted with death, and yet it remains, centuries later, untarnished on canvas, the illusion made eternal. In the end, Venetian ceruse was more than a cosmetic. It was a metaphor, a substance that promised beauty, while quietly stealing life. And in that sense, it was perfectly suited to its age, a time when the appearance of power mattered more than truth, and when the brightest lights always burned over the darkest shadows. And perhaps that is the cruel genius of history, that we still look at her portraits and see beauty, not the sickness behind it. We still whisper about her radiance, forgetting the poison beneath her skin. Her face remains frozen in time, flawless, serene, eternal, and we, like her subjects, are still enchanted by the mask. Arsenic and mercury in beauty. The quiet chambers of Elizabethan England's royal apartments were filled with the flickering shadows of candlelight, reflecting off polished wooden floors and gilded surfaces. To the casual observer, this world seemed alive with elegance, luxury, and unassailable beauty. Yet, as anyone who had worked within the Queen's intimate spaces knew, a more insidious reality lurked beneath the gilded veneers. The secret alchemy of deadly beauty, a world where the pursuit of radiance was intertwined with silent, persistent suffering. Among the most notorious and terrifying instruments of this pursuit were arsenic and mercury, metals whose names now echo with danger, but in Elizabeth's time were carefully concealed behind the guise of glamour and sophistication. For Elizabeth herself, the application of these substances was as ritualistic and deliberate as her legendary powders and wigs. Arsenic, often finely ground and mixed into creams and face paints, was prized for its ability to bleach the skin to the ghostly alabaster perfection the court demanded. It was said that a queen's pallor was her crown, a signal of divine right and noble status. Peasants, hardened by labor under the sun, bore the tan of the common laborer. The whiteness of the courtly skin marked the divide between worlds, between the visible majesty of the elite and the gritty reality of the lower classes. Yet this whiteness, so sought after and lauded, was nothing less than a slow, insidious act of self-poisoning. Arsenic, when absorbed through the skin or inhaled from powders, entered the bloodstream, affecting the liver, the heart, and the nervous system. Those who sought perfection did not feel the danger immediately. Rather, it crept silently, a cruel companion to their reflected image in polished mirrors. Mercury, a substance equally glamorous in appearance but far more deadly, became the Queen's secret ally in the battle against blemishes. Her alchemists and attendants prepared treatments that promised to erase the smallest imperfection, to smooth the tiniest line of a pockmarked cheek, to render skin flawless enough to rival the ethereal glow of candlelit alabaster. Yet Mercury's gift was double-edged. It could indeed transform the skin, bleaching and smoothing, but it wreaked havoc upon the body's core. Tremors began subtly, in the hands first, barely perceptible as one applied the creams. Over time, these tremors spread, carrying with them dizziness, nausea, and eventually the creeping disorientation that would later be recognized as madness. The mercury treatments of the court did not merely alter appearances, they corroded the very mind and body of those who pursued them. For Elizabeth, already navigating the perilous balance of politics, court intrigue, and personal longevity, such treatments were necessary, the cost invisible, the stakes infinite. The court itself became a laboratory of appearance and affliction. Women and men, inspired by the Queen's radiant visage, eagerly applied their own mixtures of arsenic and mercury, trusting in powders, ointments, and creams, whose formulas were guarded secrets. Each application promised beauty, each touch of the paste a step further from health and toward decay. Whispered tales circulated among the servants. A lady who trembled in the corridors, a gentleman whose steady hand became a quivering ghost of its former skill. Yet these signs were concealed beneath layers of powder, rouge, and paint, invisibly masking the suffering from all but the most attentive eye. In the flickering candlelight of the great hall or the Queen's private chambers, even those closest to the royal person could see only the perfection intended, not the hidden anguish it concealed. The irony was unrelenting. The very substances designed to manifest nobility, to create the image of divine and untouchable beauty, acted as silent arbiters of mortality. Those who pursued arsenic and mercury in the service of radiance experienced a paradox. They appeared immortal in reflection, yet every day the metals etched their toll deeper into the body. Tremors, rashes, and fatigue were the secret currency of beauty. Faint lines of gray around the eyes, the creeping pallor of the skin, the occasional loss of appetite and strength, all consequences willingly embraced for the sake of perception. Elizabeth herself understood the duality. Each morning's ritual, the grinding of powders, the careful blending of creams, the meticulous application by trusted attendants, was as much an act of survival in the courtly hierarchy as it was an embrace of slow, silent suffering. In this court, the chemistry of appearance was inextricable from politics. To present oneself as pale, blemish-free, and radiant was to communicate power, influence, and proximity to divine favor. To falter, to appear with a blemish or a less than perfect complexion, was to risk undermining one's position. Beauty was a language, and arsenic and mercury were its syntax, cruel yet effective. The Queen's visage, immaculate and timeless in portraiture, was not simply art. It was a declaration of sovereignty executed in chemicals, a fragile command over perception, a triumph over the mortal vulnerabilities that stalked every courtier beneath the polished surface. Even the attendants, trained in these toxic rituals, became participants in this delicate dance of life and death. They learned to balance the potency of each paste, the thickness of each layer, the timing of each application, knowing that too little diminished the effect, and too much could induce visible suffering or worse. Their expertise became a form of silent devotion. In tending to Elizabeth and the court, they ensured the continuity of the image, a living icon of perfection crafted from substances that would, inevitably, betray the flesh. Thus, the arsenic and mercury of Elizabethan beauty were more than materials. They were instruments of culture, symbols of the perilous intersection of vanity, power, and mortality. They transformed the Queen's court into a realm where the pursuit of flawless appearance demanded an invisible, relentless payment from the body, a tribute rendered in tremors, fatigue, and slow, unseen decline. Each face, each layer of cream, each dusting of powder told the same story. In the Elizabethan age, beauty was a battlefield, and victory required a price few could fully see or escape. And yet, as you peer into the candlelit reflections of the past, you can almost admire the audacity. A court willing to risk body and mind for the ephemeral glow of perfection. The Queen herself, an exemplar of the terrifying commitment to appearance. Arsenic and mercury, in the hands of Elizabeth and her devoted court, were silent sculptors of legacy, etching elegance over life, crafting a perfection so brilliant and deadly that it endures in memory, portrait, and whispered fascination across the centuries. The ritual of applying the mask. The first rays of morning light would creep softly into the chamber of Queen Elizabeth I, reflecting off polished wooden panels, gilded furniture, and the heavy draperies that framed the tall windows of her private quarters. The air was dense with the mingled scents of perfumed oils, fragrant powders, and the faint, lingering odor of wax from the candles that had burned through the night. Within this glittering, intoxicating haze, a ritual unfolded that was at once delicate, meticulous, and quietly lethal. It was the daily transformation of Elizabeth, from a mortal woman, bound by the limits of flesh and time, into the living emblem of power, majesty, and near-divine authority, a ritual that would come to define her reign and, in its way, the very aesthetics of Elizabethan England. It was a ritual of performance, a careful layering of artifice upon vulnerability, and it carried with it risks that no one in the court could fully comprehend. Servants, long trained in the intricacies of this hidden craft, moved with a practiced precision that bespoke years of apprenticeship and devotion. Each one understood the delicate nature of their charge. The Queen's image was her most potent weapon, her most visible manifestation of sovereignty. To misapply a powder, to disturb a layer of rouge, to misjudge the consistency of a paste, was to risk not merely a minor embarrassment, but the careful illusion that had been constructed over decades. The Venetian ceruse, a mixture of powdered white lead and vinegar, was prepared with painstaking care. This substance, infamous for its toxicity, formed the foundation upon which the Queen's visage would be built. As the paste was applied to her cheeks, forehead, and chin, it smoothed over wrinkles, blemishes, and imperfections, creating the ghostly, alabaster pallor that became synonymous with nobility and divine favor. Each brushstroke was deliberate, each motion calculated to conceal the frailty of flesh beneath the seemingly perfect mask of porcelain beauty. The application of ceruse was merely the first step. Once the base was in place, a careful touch of rouge, often containing mercury, was added to the cheeks, lending the illusion of vitality and health to a visage already transformed. The mercury, like the lead in the foundation, was slowly and invisibly entering the bloodstream, a silent and insidious adversary that imperceptibly undermined the Queen's nervous system. Tremors, weakness, and long-term health consequences were the hidden price of her flawless appearance. Yet Elizabeth embraced these dangers, recognizing that her survival as sovereign depended as much on her image as on her council or her armies. The daily layering of powders and pastes was a negotiation with mortality, a subtle confrontation with the fragility of human flesh. Within the quiet, perfumed air of the chamber, the Queen was at once the artist and the canvas, the performer and the performance itself. No transformation would have been complete without the careful arrangement of wigs, themselves heavily powdered and scented to complement the ghostly visage beneath. These wigs were not merely fashion statements. They were extensions of the Queen's identity, insulating her from the smells of the crowded, bustling palace, while providing a visible symbol of power and distinction. The wigs absorbed the ambient odors of Whitehall, the mingled scents of scented oils, burning candles, animal fats, and the daily exertions of hundreds of servants and courtiers, yet they maintained the illusion of perfection, of untouchable regality. In the curling tendrils of powdered hair, in the precise placement of each lock and coil, the Queen's attendants were orchestrating a spectacle of authority, ensuring that Elizabeth's appearance could withstand the scrutiny of ambassadors, visiting dignitaries, and the ever-watchful eyes of her court. The Queen's gloves and handkerchiefs were also carefully prepared, soaked in oils and scented with herbs and flowers, functioning both as accessories and as additional layers in the intricate machinery of her presentation. The application of these items required the same precision and care as the powders and pastes, for they were integral to the illusion of health, refinement, and divinely ordained sovereignty. Every movement of the Queen's hands, every gesture performed before her audience, was calculated to reinforce the perception of invulnerability and perfection, masking the slow toll exacted by the poisons she had embraced in the service of beauty. The gloves were more than adornments. They were shields, concealing both the physical realities of her existence and the vulnerabilities she could not afford to reveal. In this carefully choreographed ritual, The chamber became a stage, the attendants became performers in a silent ballet, and Elizabeth herself became the nexus of a spectacle in which mortality, power, and perception intertwine. The powders and rouge, the wigs and gloves, the scented oils and perfumed handkerchiefs, all coalesced into a single performance that defined the Queen's reign and shaped the cultural expectations of her court. To look upon Elizabeth was to behold the ideal of Elizabethan beauty and authority, but beneath the surface, her body bore the consequences of decades of exposure to lead, mercury, and arsenic. The Queen's daily ritual was both a shield and a dagger, a means of asserting control over her image while quietly enfeebling her flesh. Even as dawn broke fully over Whitehall, illuminating the chamber with the first true light of day, the ritual of the mask continued unabated. Elizabeth, seated with the stillness of a sovereign and the patience of one who understood the stakes, allowed her attendants to layer and blend, to powder and rouge, to arrange and scent, until the transformation was complete. It was a metamorphosis that went beyond mere cosmetics. It was a negotiation with the passage of time, with the inevitability of decay, and with the political necessity of maintaining the image of eternal, unassailable majesté. The Queen emerged from the chamber, not simply as a woman, but as the embodiment of the state, a living emblem of authority, culture, and power, a figure whose beauty, though deadly in its making, became inseparable from the image of Elizabethan England itself. Through this morning ritual, every movement, every application of powder, every scent-laden accessory was an assertion of control. The Queen's visage was both art and armor, simultaneously mesmerizing and dangerous, a testament to the extraordinary lengths she and her court would go to preserve the illusion of perfection. In those quiet, flickering hours of dawn, Elizabeth was both fragile and invincible, mortal yet immortal in appearance, a sovereign for whom beauty and death walked hand in hand, and for whom every brushstroke was a negotiation with fate itself. Hair as a crown of power, the early morning light crept through the tall, narrow windows of Whitehall, spilling onto the polished wooden floors and the thick layers of rugs and tapestries that lined the corridors. In the stillness of dawn, a subtle anticipation hung in the air, one that could be felt by every attendant and servant bustling quietly in preparation for the day ahead. At the center of this flurry was Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, whose presence defined the rhythm and gravity of the court itself. Her hair, a fiery red-gold blaze, was more than mere strands of pigmented protein. It was a symbol, an emblem of her divine authority, a living banner of England's power. The way it caught the early light, glowing against the pale whiteness of her lead-based powdered face, commanded attention even before her voice was heard or her gestures noticed. Every morning, the ritual of Elizabeth's hair was an intricate dance of artistry, danger, and symbolism, a performance that had been refined over decades, perfected to project an image of invulnerability, youth, and celestial beauty, even as it concealed the inevitable toll exacted upon her body and those who served her. Elizabeth's hair, in its natural state, would have been remarkable in its own right, fiery, vibrant, and striking, but the Queen and her attendants had cultivated it into something beyond the ordinary. Pigments and powders were applied with painstaking precision to enhance the luminosity of her red-gold strands. Powders often laced with substances that modern eyes would recognize as highly toxic. Lead, finely ground and mixed into dusting powders, not only brightened the hair, but also contributed to subtle, cumulative poisoning. The Queen herself bore the risk silently, aware that the striking visual effect was worth the hidden cost. For every morning without her hair properly presented was a morning of diminished authority, a weakening of the aura that had made her the Virgin Queen and the figurehead of an entire nation. The attention to detail extended beyond color. Curls were teased to perfection, waves were carefully sculpted, and strands were arranged to catch the light just so, creating an almost ethereal halo that radiated both power and beauty. For the courtiers and ladies in waiting, Elizabeth's hair was the benchmark of nobility and taste, an aspirational standard that many sought to emulate despite the perils involved. The desire to match her radiant hues drove women of the court to extremes. Bleaching agents like lye, often mixed with urine, were applied to natural hair to strip its color, a process that could leave the scalp raw, hair brittle, and follicles irreparably damaged. Pain and burning were accepted as the price of prestige, for in Elizabethan England, proximity to the Queen's beauty signaled proximity to power itself. Hair was not merely cosmetic, it was social currency. Those who could display the red-gold brilliance, whether naturally or through dangerous treatments, broadcasted both their devotion to the Queen and their own standing within the tightly woven hierarchy of courtly life. Wigs became the next stage in this intricate performance of hair and identity. When natural hair failed to achieve the desired hue or volume, artificial enhancements crafted from human hair, or even from animal fibers, were meticulously constructed, shaped, and powdered to perfection. These wigs were heavy, requiring delicate balancing, and the application of lead-laced powders ensured a pale, uniform tone that would be recognized instantly as fashionable and royal. Servants labored for hours, teasing, braiding, and sculpting, often inhaling the toxic dust that settled in the air around them. Even as they worked in quiet devotion, the risk to their health was undeniable, a silent cost for the maintenance of the Queen's image and the court's rituals. Wigs could weigh several pounds and were often adorned with ribbons, jeweled pins, or other ornaments to denote rank and wealth, transforming each hairstyle into an emblem of social hierarchy, a mobile badge of status, and a visual statement of loyalty and subservience. The daily preparation of the Queen's hair was a delicate balance between aesthetic perfection and practical limitation. The powders, pigments, and oils used to maintain her fiery red-gold locks were carefully measured to avoid ruining the intricate arrangements. But every application was an additional exposure to toxic substances. Lead, mercury, and other harmful chemicals were hidden in the mix, absorbed through the scalp, inhaled with each breath, or applied directly to the skin in ways that compounded the danger. The ritual was, in essence, a dance with mortality. The more perfect the hair, the greater the risk, yet the stakes demanded perfection. For Elizabeth, who relied upon her appearance as a shield against political rivals, as a mark of divine favor, and as a means to command obedience, there was no alternative. Even as Elizabeth's hair radiated power and majesty, it also created a network of influence across the court. Courtiers, eager to curry favor and demonstrate loyalty, emulated her styles, attempting to capture some of the aura that seemed to surround the Queen. Perfumed powders, colored strands, and carefully coiffed curls were all part of a visual language of allegiance. A courtier's ability to replicate the Queen's hair was a signal of devotion, taste, and attentiveness, and failure to do so could be socially damaging, marking one as inattentive or unrefined. In this way, Elizabeth's hair shaped the court's culture, establishing a standard of beauty and appearance that was inseparable from politics and survival. The fire of her hair's brilliance was not without cost. Attendants, who handled the powders, pigments, and wigs daily, inhaled toxic dust, and handled caustic substances with bare hands. Their health slowly eroded in the service of the Queen's image. Even Elizabeth herself was not immune. The very hair that symbolized her vitality and divine favor also carried invisible threats, a reminder that beauty, power, and survival in her era were inseparably linked to risk. Every strand of hair, every carefully powdered curl, became a testament to devotion, discipline, and the invisible sacrifices woven into the fabric of Elizabethan court life. As the morning progressed, Elizabeth emerged from her private chamber, her hair a crown of fire and gold, glowing against the stark whiteness of her powdered face. The courtiers and attendants paused in reverence, acknowledging not only the queen's beauty, but also the immense labor and danger that went into creating it. In her hair, they saw authority, divinity, and perfection. Behind it lay a hidden world of suffering, sacrifice, and silent endurance, where each curl, each wave, each pigmented lock carried the weight of human fragility and ambition. The ritual of Elizabeth's hair, therefore, was more than mere grooming. It was an intricate theater of power, a daily performance that melded aesthetics, politics, and peril. It was a symbol of authority, a statement of divine favor, and a network of influence that shaped the court and the nation alike. Every morning, as powders were dusted, curls teased, and wigs carefully positioned, the queen's hair became both a shield and a banner, proclaiming her sovereignty while quietly exacting its hidden toll on all who participated in its creation, maintaining the fiery crown of power that would define Elizabeth I for generations to come. Perfumes and poisonous powders, the morning light filtered through the tall, narrow windows of Whitehall, slipping past layers of drawn curtains and falling upon the powdered faces of the court. The flicker of candle flames casting shadows that danced upon the gilded walls. In the midst of this carefully curated spectacle, the scent of Elizabeth I's presence was already palpable. Perfume, thick and almost tangible, lingered in the air like an invisible cloak, enveloping everyone nearby. For you, standing among the courtiers and servants, preparing the queen for another day in her kingdom, the air was a heady mixture of rose, musk, ambergris, and the faintly bitter undertones of decay from weeks-old cosmetics. This was the ritual of perfume, a practice that had evolved in Elizabethan England into something both essential and suffocating, a form of armor as vital as her painted face. You watched the attendants, their hands nimble and precise, dabbing and layering scents upon Elizabeth's wrists, neck, and the folds of her elaborate gowns. Each application is deliberate, a gesture that carries centuries of inherited knowledge, an understanding of both the aesthetic and political weight carried by scent. Perfume is not mere indulgence, here it is necessity. Bathing is rare and avoided. Water is thought to open the pores to disease, a dangerous vulnerability in a world governed by the miasma theory. So instead, the queen and her courtiers rely on the invisible yet potent shroud of fragrance to shield themselves from the ever-present odors of human life sweat, unwashed hair, and the decay of cosmetic layers applied over weeks. The fragrance is a weapon, a signal, and a mask all at once. It allows Elizabeth to move through her court with an aura of refinement and power, while concealing the physical realities of her human body beneath layers of ritualized application. As you follow the attendants through the corridors, you notice how each scent mingles with the ever-present smoke of the palace. Candles burn constantly, their flames feeding on tallow, releasing acrid fumes that drift upward into the high ceilings, coating tapestries and powdered faces alike. The perfume is heavy, almost overwhelming, yet it is necessary to maintain the illusion of cleanliness and control. Without it, the human odors of the palace, baked meats, unwashed garments, and the accumulated scents of crowded rooms would betray the court's cultivated refinement. Here, scent has become a form of social order, It dictates proximity, signals favor, and marks hierarchy. Nobles and courtiers who carry the correct fragrances demonstrate their knowledge of etiquette and their awareness of the queen's preferences, while any misstep in scent could be read as negligence or disrespect. You notice the subtle layering techniques employed. Rosewater dabbed on the temples to invigorate the senses, musk applied behind the ears to create a lingering base, ambergris folded into powdered gloves to ensure the scent persists, even as hands brush against objects and people. It is an art perfected through observation and apprenticeship, a ritual performed daily in a precise choreography. Each layer is applied with the understanding that scent communicates silently, a language of power and presence. It covers more than bodily odors. It covers the vulnerabilities of flesh and the imperfections that might otherwise reveal the human fragility of a sovereign. The perfume acts as a shield, hiding not only sweat and decay, but the creeping effects of toxic cosmetics, the white lead on her face, the mercury-laden rouge, and the arsenic-laced brightening powders that, beneath this fragrant veneer, slowly degrade the body itself. Yet, this comfort is paradoxical. While perfume shields the queen and her court from the stench of reality, it also becomes a suffocating, almost oppressive presence. The air is thick, and as you stand in the inner chambers, you can feel it cling to your own skin and clothing. The mixture of natural fragrances with chemical residues and smoke creates an environment that is both protective and punishing. Courtiers and attendants endure headaches, watery eyes, and the persistent tickle of dust and powder in their throats. But the social imperative outweighs physical discomfort. To fail in the mastery of scent is to risk social ostracism, to show ignorance, or to offend the queen herself. Perfume is therefore as much about survival, social, political, and symbolic, as it is about masking odors. You observe how Elizabeth's presence, defined by fragrance as much as by her painted visage, influences those around her. Courtiers mimic her scent faithfully, layering themselves with oils, powders, and herb-infused waters, blending their own bodies into the olfactory tapestry of the court. Perfume becomes a political tool, a subtle language of allegiance and power, signaling both knowledge and loyalty. It is a constant performance, a daily negotiation of identity, influence, and hierarchy, all communicated silently through the air that clings to silk gowns, leather gloves, and powdered hair. Those who fail to participate fully in this ritual risk being read as outsiders, failing to grasp the intricate rules of courtly life where smell is as instructive as sight or speech. As the morning progresses, the queen moves through her rooms, the layers of fragrance enveloping every corner, every object, and every person who comes into proximity. The mixture of scents lingers long after she passes, and you note how the perfumes, while masking decay, also create a psychological landscape, a comforting reassurance to the wearer, and a subtle intimidation to observers. The power of scent becomes evident. It defines the boundaries of presence and authority. It conceals vulnerability, transforms the mundane into majesty, and renders the physical body secondary to the carefully constructed image. By mid-morning, the ritual reaches its culmination. Elizabeth's face, powdered and painted, is complete. Her hair, scented and powdered, frames her visage in perfect symmetry. Her garments exude layers of fragrance, signaling rank, taste, and favor. The air in Whitehall is thick, almost tangible, with the confluence of rose, musk, ambergris, and smoke, a signature that announces her presence even before she enters the hall. The perfume, applied in careful, precise rituals, has achieved its dual purpose. It shields her from the odors of reality and asserts her control over perception. It is both the comfort she requires to face her demanding day and the invisible armor she must wear to maintain authority. In this world of scent, the physical reality of human bodies, decay, and vulnerability is subsumed beneath a meticulous, fragrant illusion. Elizabethan perfume is simultaneously a tool, a ritual, and a silent warning. Beauty, power, and survival are inseparable, yet each carries a cost. The fragrances that waft through Whitehall remind you, and any listener imagining the scene, that in this age, nothing is as it seems. The perfume masks more than odor, it masks mortality, control, and the delicate balance between health and the relentless pursuit of aesthetic perfection. In the suffocating, intoxicating air of the court, fragrance becomes the language of life, authority, and survival, an invisible symphony that defines the very essence of Elizabethan existence. The myth of purity and the performance of power. The court of Elizabeth I in the late 16th century was a place of dazzling spectacle, a glittering display of power, influence, and ritual. Every corner of Whitehall and the smaller palaces she occupied seemed to pulse with life, music, chatter, and the subtle movements of courtiers performing the intricate dance of loyalty and survival. Yet beneath the glittering veneer of her reign lay a hidden world, one in which beauty and authority were inseparably entwined with danger, illness, and meticulous attention to appearance. In Elizabethan England, appearances were not merely cosmetic, they were political instruments, weapons of perception that could elevate a ruler to mythic heights or leave her subjects in doubt. For Elizabeth herself, the creation of her public image was a daily, intimate, and sometimes deadly ritual, centered around her obsession with pale, unblemished skin and flawless appearance. Her whiteness was more than a fashion statement. It was an assertion of control, purity, and divine right, a living emblem of power that required constant reinforcement through layers of powders, paints, and potions, some of which were poisonous, some corrosive, and all meticulously applied. Elizabeth's obsession with maintaining a ghostly, pale complexion was born of both cultural expectation and personal desire. In an age when outdoor labor darkened the skin of peasants and lesser nobility, the pale face became a symbol of privilege, refinement, and untouchability. To be white was to signal that one's time was not spent toiling under the sun, but rather in governance, study, or courtly life. Elizabeth's skin, therefore, was not merely flesh, but a canvas upon which the story of her sovereignty was written. Venetian ceruse, a mixture of white lead and vinegar, was her primary instrument in this pursuit. Applied daily by skilled attendants, the ceruse created a matte, ghostly pallor that transformed her visage into something both ethereal and intimidating. It was the mask of a queen, a layer of power painted directly onto her body. Yet the very material that made her image so arresting was slowly corrosive, seeping into her skin, disrupting her health, and causing a subtle but relentless decay of her body, invisible to the public eye, but devastating over time. The application of these cosmetic layers was a ritual of precision and control. Servants, trained in the alchemy of powders and pigments, worked for hours to build Elizabeth's visage into the emblem of authority it was meant to be. Every brushstroke, every dab of rouge or ceruse was deliberate. A misapplied layer could diminish the effect of the illusion, compromising not only her appearance, but the perception of her power. Her attendants mixed powders with oils to create the perfect consistency, ensuring that her skin glimmered under the candlelight, while concealing the natural imperfections that might betray her human fragility. The process was painstaking and repeated multiple times a day. a constant performance of control over nature, mortality, and the gaze of the court. Elizabeth's redness, too, was carefully manufactured. Rouged cheeks gave the impression of vitality and youth, the faint blush of life atop the deathly pale foundation. Mercury-laden rouges were used to achieve the desired effect, capable of causing tremors and long-term health effects. But the visual language they created was worth the silent toll. Each aspect of her face communicated a message. The pallor spoke of chastity and nobility. The rouge, carefully applied, whispered of vitality and attention without undermining the purity of the facade. Through these choices, Elizabeth projected an image of imperviousness, a virgin queen whose very appearance was an extension of her authority, untouchable in its perfection, even as her body quietly suffered beneath layers of toxic adornment. Her hair, too, played a central role in this carefully managed image. Elizabeth's red-gold locks were both natural and emblematic, often accentuated through wigs powdered and treated with lead dust to match her idealized appearance. Courtiers seeking to emulate her beauty would go to extreme lengths, bleaching their hair with urine and lye, enduring burns and hair loss in imitation of the queen's fiery crown. For Elizabeth, hair was more than vanity. It was a symbol of divinity, a visible halo around her carefully constructed face, marking her as different, untouchable, and sovereign. Perfume was another crucial element of this visual and olfactory tableau. The scent of Elizabeth was carefully controlled and applied, masking both the odors of her own body, often unwashed due to prevailing beliefs about the dangers of bathing, and the scent of the court itself. Layers of rose, musk, ambergris, and other fragrances mingled with the faint haze of candle smoke and the persistent aroma of unwashed fabrics, creating a sensory environment that was as much a performance as her appearance. The scent reinforced her authority and demanded obedience. It became a tool of power, a way to control the way her courtiers, visitors, and even foreign dignitaries experienced her presence. To enter Elizabeth's chambers was to be enveloped in the essence of monarchy, a subtle assertion of her control that extended beyond sight into the very air of the court. The symbolic function of Elizabeth's appearance extended beyond the personal into the political. Her whiteness, her rouge, her scent all communicated her divine right to rule. In a society where queenship was constantly under scrutiny, the perfection of her image acted as a defense against criticism, rumor, and the threats of internal dissent or foreign intrigue. Every day, she performed power in its most delicate form, through the careful maintenance of her own body, the manipulation of perception, and the creation of a living myth. The court imitated her, adopting similar rituals of scented powders and wigs, establishing a hierarchy of obedience through the replication of her image. Loyalty was demonstrated through conformity to the aesthetic she prescribed, embedding the politics of scent, powder, and paint into the social fabric of the Elizabethan court. Yet behind this polished image lay the quiet erosion of health, the invisible cost of control. Lead and mercury poisoned the skin and body, hair treatments caused burns, and the constant layer of perfumes concealed signs of fatigue and disease. Elizabeth's visage, perfected for public consumption, hid the frailty of flesh and the vulnerability of a mortal body. The rituals that elevated her to iconic status also threatened the longevity of that very body, illustrating the perilous intersection of beauty, power, and survival in the Elizabethan age. Through these daily acts of painting, perfuming, and sculpting her image, Elizabeth I created a visual and sensory legend that continues to fascinate centuries later. Her face became a symbol, a public statement of purity, power, and divine right. Every touch of brush, every application of powder, Every inhaled fragrance was part of the negotiation between body and myth, between mortal limitations and the crafted image of immortality. In this delicate balance of performance and peril, Elizabeth redefined the role of the monarch. Her body, her appearance, and her very scent became instruments of authority, illustrating the extraordinary lengths to which a ruler might go to command obedience, respect, and awe. The hidden decay beneath the mask. The world of Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, was a theater of appearances, a stage upon which power, beauty, and perception intertwined in ways that few outside her immediate circle could ever truly understand. In the previous chapters, we have explored the elaborate rituals of her daily preparation, the carefully applied layers of white lead foundation and mercury-laden rouge, the powdered wigs, the scented gloves, and the perfumed fabrics, all meticulously crafted to create an image of perfection and invulnerability. Yet, beneath this shimmering surface, the reality of Elizabeth's own flesh told a story of slow, relentless decay, a hidden narrative that the public never witnessed, but that shaped her life and her legacy in profound ways. It was a story of the hidden cost of beauty, of a sovereign whose power was inseparable from the very physical suffering that her courtly rituals demanded, and whose daily existence balanced precariously between authority and corporeal deterioration. By the mid-years of Elizabeth's reign, the cumulative effects of decades of cosmetic application had begun to manifest more visibly beneath her carefully curated masks. Venetian ceruse, applied daily and without fail, whitened the queen's skin to an almost otherworldly pallor, yet its lead content was toxic, leaching into the very tissues of her face. Mercury, used in rouges to create the illusion of vitality on her cheeks, was equally pernicious. With each careful stroke applied by her attendants, with each morning ritual of layering powders and creams, Elizabeth's flesh silently absorbed these poisons, and the damage was cumulative. Tiny fissures appeared along the delicate skin of her face, the texture changing subtly but inexorably. Beneath the smooth porcelain-like veneer that she presented to her courtiers and the foreign dignitaries who visited Whitehall, her skin was beginning to show early signs of deterioration, a slow, inexorable decay that no amount of perfumed powder could entirely mask. Rather than abandon these rituals, Elizabeth responded in the only way that reinforced her control over perception. She doubled down. She layered more foundation, powdered her wigs with greater intensity, and relied even more heavily on the scent of her perfumes to create an aura of vitality and invincibility. Every morning, the process began anew. Attendants carefully blended lead-based powders with scented oils, dabbing, brushing, and smoothing until her skin, beneath the layers, was both protected and trapped. It was a paradoxical shield. The thicker the layers, the less visible the decay became, but also the heavier the burden on her body. Each application created a barrier between her reality and her image, a buffer that allowed her to move through court and diplomacy as though she were untouched by time, illness, or human frailty. The irony was profound. In her pursuit of perfection, Elizabeth's methods had turned the very act of beauty into a slow, insidious assault on her own health. Her cheeks, once soft and unblemished, were now susceptible to cracking and irritation, the delicate dermis suffering under the weight of toxic ingredients. Her pores, closed to water and flushed with powders, could not properly breathe, creating conditions in which skin infections, lesions, and discoloration could thrive unseen. The red of her rouge, meant to symbolize vitality and youth, masked the subtle grayish undertones that hinted at chemical damage. To the casual observer, her appearance was eternal, flawless, and commanding. To those who understood the subtle cues, There was a story of endurance, of suffering carried quietly beneath layers of artistry and discipline. The physical effects were not limited to the superficial skin. Lead and mercury had systemic effects, affecting her nerves, her digestive system, and even her cognitive clarity over time. Attendants whispered quietly in the private chambers about occasional tremors or discomforts that the Queen experienced, though any such signs were carefully concealed from visitors and courtiers. The performance of health, like the performance of nobility itself, required meticulous management. Every brushstroke, every application of perfume, every adjustment of the wig was part of a carefully orchestrated routine that allowed Elizabeth to maintain her public image while silently negotiating the deterioration of her own body. In many ways, the mask of makeup became a metaphor for the entire nature of her rule. The face she presented to the world was not the flesh beneath it, but a carefully constructed symbol of authority, resilience, and divine right. Just as her courtiers performed rituals of obeisance and loyalty, so too did her own appearance perform a ritual of permanence, signaling that the Virgin Queen was untouchable, eternal, and commanding. Each day, Elizabeth endured the discomfort, the itchiness, the subtle burns, and the creeping malaise of toxic exposure, all to ensure that the visage she displayed communicated the power she wielded over England. Her image was a living icon, a talisman of sovereignty, a visual proclamation of authority that concealed the fragile human reality beneath. The rituals surrounding her appearance also reinforced the social hierarchies of the court. Her attendants, women and men, trained to understand the delicate balance of cosmetic application, participated in the construction of her image. Their labor, both intimate and exacting, was essential in creating the flawless facade. Yet this same facade was a weapon, a tool of political dominance that extended beyond mere beauty. Visitors, ambassadors, and foreign dignitaries were awed by her appearance, convinced of her divine favor and regal perfection, while the realities of lead poisoning, skin erosion, and the internal toll of mercury-based rouges remained hidden from public view. Every audience, every procession, every portrait commissioned by court artists was an extension of this concealed narrative, where the Queen's mortality was masked by the extraordinary illusion of agelessness. Even in portraits, where the limitations of paint could not conceal all, Elizabeth's image was idealized. Artists depicted her skin as flawless, her features smooth, her gaze commanding yet serene, reinforcing the narrative of divine perfection. Yet beneath the brushstrokes and varnish, the skin that had endured decades of toxic treatments was a different story. Tiny fissures, subtle discolorations, and imperfections that might have marred a lesser woman's reputation were erased, hidden by the myth of the Queen herself. Each painting, like her daily application of cosmetics, served as a layer of performance, a layer of control over both perception and reality, reinforcing the delicate balance she maintained between the power she projected and the decay she endured privately. What is most striking about this hidden decay is how it reflects the broader culture of Elizabethan England. The pursuit of perfection, the intertwining of appearance and authority, and the willingness to endure personal suffering for public perception were not unique to Elizabeth, but were amplified in her presence. The Queen's body became a canvas, a tool, and a symbol, demonstrating how power, vanity, and societal expectation could converge into rituals of extraordinary intensity. In a court obsessed with lineage, loyalty, and visual symbols, her ability to mask the deterioration beneath layers of cosmetic poison was both a triumph of artifice and a testament to the human capacity for endurance. Thus, the hidden decay beneath Elizabeth's mask was never merely a private ailment. It was a narrative, a story written in powder, lead, and mercury across the queen's visage. It was a secret visible to few, but essential to her rule, a paradox of vulnerability and strength intertwined. The layers of cosmetics, the daily rituals, and the strategic applications created a living metaphor that in Elizabethan England, power and beauty were inseparable from danger, endurance, and the careful orchestration of perception. In the shadows of courtly life, behind the idealized face that inspired awe and devotion, lay the reality of human fragility, the quiet suffering that allowed a monarch to perform the impossible, the illusion of eternal, untouchable perfection. And so, beneath every layer of lead and mercury, beneath every carefully applied powder, Elizabeth's body endured, a silent witness to the cost of being a queen, in an age when beauty could kill and power demanded the impossible. Lip color and rouge of death. The story of Elizabeth I's beauty rituals, meticulously detailed in previous chapters, takes yet another dark and fascinating turn when one considers the vibrant flush of red that adorned her lips and cheeks. In the dazzling court of the Virgin Queen, every aspect of appearance was a deliberate performance, a careful orchestration of color, texture, and scent that signaled authority, virtue, and divine favor. While her pale, lead-whitened skin created the impression of ethereal, untouchable beauty, it was the bright rouge on her cheeks and the vivid red on her lips that animated her face, giving life to the otherwise ghostly pallor of her foundation. These crimson touches, so striking against the milky canvas of her skin, were symbols of vitality, energy, and power, yet hidden beneath their superficial allure lay one of the deadliest aspects of Elizabethan beauty poison: silent, insidious, and ultimately destructive. Rouge in the Elizabethan era was far from a benign cosmetic. It was made from ingredients that, to modern sensibilities, would be recognized immediately as hazardous. Vermilion, or mercury sulfide, was prized for its vivid red hue, a color that suggested health, vigor, and youth. The process of producing this pigment was labor-intensive and chemically dangerous, and its application directly onto the skin was far from innocuous. When applied to the queen's cheeks or lips, this mineral compound was absorbed into the body over time, slowly releasing mercury into her system. The effects of chronic mercury poisoning were subtle at first: occasional tremors, slight fatigue, or fleeting irritability, but gradually intensified, affecting her nervous system, weakening her body, and contributing to a decline in overall health. What appeared to the court as an effervescent flush of life was, beneath the surface, a slow erosion of her vitality, a price exacted by the very ritual that elevated her image. In addition to mineral-based rouge, some lip colors were derived from organic materials, including crushed insects such as cochineal. These substances provided rich reds and deep crimsons that were impossible to achieve with mere pigments from minerals alone. The preparation of these compounds involved careful grinding, mixing with oils or waxes, and repeated application to ensure the color remained bright under the flickering candlelight of Whitehall's chambers. The Queen's attendants, who were well trained in these dangerous arts, handled these pigments daily, aware of their potential harm, but committed to the perfection of her appearance. The very act of applying these substances was a delicate ritual, blending artistry, chemistry, and unwavering devotion. Yet every brushstroke carried the risk of poisoning, irritation, or long-term physiological effects. The symbolic significance of rouge and lip color cannot be overstated. In a court where image and perception were paramount, red lips were more than mere decoration. They were a coded statement. They signaled youth, energy, and sexual vitality, even within the context of Elizabeth's celebrated virginity. They conveyed a visual reassurance to courtiers, diplomats, and foreign emissaries that the queen was vigorous, capable, and divinely favored. The flush of red acted almost as a living exclamation point on her otherwise ethereal visage, animating her face during ceremonies, audience sessions, and the intricate dances of courtly performance. Every tilt of the head, every carefully posed smile, and every intentional gesture was enhanced by the vibrant rouge, a testament to the intricate interplay between appearance and authority. Yet the physical toll of these cosmetic choices was profound. Chronic exposure to mercury from vermilion could lead to tremors in the hands, stiffness in the muscles, and a general weakness that was exacerbated by the queen's demanding schedule of courtly obligations and political duties. Some chroniclers, writing with veiled concern or euphemistic caution, noted that Elizabeth sometimes exhibited small, unsteady movements or moments of fatigue that were inconsistent with the lively vigor she projected publicly. While the exact details of her health remain the subject of historical debate, the connection between cosmetic mercury exposure and physiological decline is undeniable. The brilliance of her appearance came at the cost of her own body, an exchange invisible to her subjects and foreign visitors, who beheld only the flawless exterior. Moreover, the application of these rouges was repeated multiple times a day. Elizabeth's routine often began at dawn with the preparation of her powdered foundation, and continued with successive layers of rouge, applied carefully to highlight her cheeks and lips. Throughout the day, touch-ups were performed to maintain the vibrancy of color, particularly in the context of courtly audiences or ceremonial appearances. Each application added another layer of exposure, another increment of risk, yet the performance was non-negotiable. The visual impact of her face, the harmony of pale skin, red lips, and powdered hair was integral to her authority, and Elizabeth was acutely aware that any lapse in this image could be interpreted as a loss of control or a sign of human frailty. The psychological dimension of this ritual is equally striking. The queen's obsession with her appearance reflected the intense pressures of power, the constant surveillance of courtiers, and the need to maintain an aura of invincibility. The red of her lips and cheeks was a visual defense, a protective layer against scrutiny, criticism, and the creeping evidence of aging. In this way, the rouge was both cosmetic and symbolic, a talisman of strength and resilience that allowed Elizabeth to perform the impossible, the illusion of eternal vitality in a human body, slowly eroding under the combined pressures of age, political stress, and toxic beauty practices. Even within the palace, the effects of this obsession were visible to those trained to observe closely. Attendants, ladies-in-waiting, and trusted physicians would note subtle changes, a slight tremor, a paleness beneath the blush, or fatigue in the queen's movements. These observations were treated discreetly, for any public acknowledgement of weakness could undermine Elizabeth's carefully constructed image. Yet in private, the physical consequences of cosmetic use, especially the mercury-laden rouge, were real and unrelenting. The brilliance of her visage, the captivating red of her lips, was a mask over hidden suffering, a reminder that beauty, power, and danger were inseparable in the Elizabethan court. The court itself, meanwhile, responded in kind. Ladies and gentlemen of the household, eager to emulate the queen, adopted their own routines of rouge application, spreading the effects of these poisonous substances throughout the aristocracy. Loyalty, ambition, and social conformity created a feedback loop. The queen's choices dictated fashion and appearance, while her courtiers' mimicry reinforced the importance of color, vibrancy, and the illusion of life. The red lips that once signaled vitality now became a quiet agent of shared risk, a ritual in which the desire to display status and beauty intersected with a hidden threat imperceptible to most, but inexorably shaping the lives of those who participated. Thus, the story of Elizabeth's lips, coated in mercury-rich rouge, is one of paradox and tension. It is a story of artistry and death, of authority and vulnerability, of brilliance and decay. The brilliant red that adorned her mouth symbolized life, power, and divine favor, even as it carried the seeds of physical decline, creating a slow, silent narrative of mortality beneath the performance of perfection. In Elizabethan England, the pursuit of beauty was inseparable from danger, and no aspect of her appearance exemplifies this more than the toxic, vibrant flush of the Queen's lips, a performance that enthralled, commanded, and slowly consumed the very life it celebrated. Tooth decay and the sweet curse. The story of Elizabeth I's elaborate and often perilous beauty rituals continues to unfold, and one of the most telling, yet little discussed aspects of her physical condition lies in her teeth. In an age before modern dentistry, teeth were not just functional organs but also visible markers of status, indulgence, and even political identity. Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, was no exception. Her fascination with sweets, candied fruits, refined sugar lozenges, and syruped delicacies imported from the distant reaches of the empire reveals much about the intersection of pleasure, power, and peril in the Elizabethan court. Sugar, at the time, was more than a culinary delight. It was a luxury, a sign of wealth, and a tool of distinction. It was expensive, rare, and imported from the faraway colonies and Mediterranean trade routes, meaning that only the highest echelons of society could afford even a modest amount. To Elizabeth, sugar was not merely sustenance or indulgence. It was a symbol of her elevated position, a mark of sophistication and royal entitlement. She consumed it liberally, in ways that her courtiers, her household staff, and visiting diplomats could observe, making her taste for sweets a very public declaration of status. However, this sweetness came with a bitter consequence. The consumption of sugar, combined with the limited knowledge of oral hygiene in the 16th century, created the perfect storm for dental decay. Elizabeth's teeth suffered as a result, gradually rotting away beneath the enamel, weakened by the constant exposure to sugary substances. Cavities, discoloration, and abscesses became an inevitable consequence of her indulgence. Yet Elizabeth, ever the master of image, never allowed the physical reality of her teeth to become visible in public. She employed a variety of ingenious methods to conceal her dental decay. Perfumed gloves were pressed to her mouth during conversation, handkerchiefs were discreetly employed to mask foul breath, and strategic positioning during portraits ensured that her smile could be idealized by painters while masking the reality. Her teeth, the silent witnesses to years of indulgence and the inadvertent damage wrought by her wealth and luxury, became both a private suffering and a public performance. The influence of Elizabeth's decayed teeth extended far beyond her personal concealment. Courtiers and ladies of the court, devoted to imitation and ever sensitive to the subtleties of royal fashion, began to emulate the Queen in startling ways. One of the most peculiar trends to emerge was the intentional blackening of teeth. This practice, known as ohaguro in certain cultures, or simply a cosmetic blackening in England, involved the application of dyes to darken teeth, creating the illusion of decay. In the Elizabethan court, it became a curious fashion statement. Blackened teeth symbolized a kind of intimate solidarity with the Queen, a demonstration of devotion and loyalty, and a visible acknowledgement of her singular beauty rituals. The act of blackening one's teeth was not without health risks. Chemicals and dyes could irritate gums and introduce toxins into the mouth. But the desire to participate in the Queen's aesthetic world outweighed such concerns. It was a vivid illustration of how personal indulgence at the top of the social hierarchy could ripple downward, influencing behaviors and creating trends that carried their own dangers. The decay of Elizabeth's teeth was not merely a cosmetic or fashion concern. It also had tangible effects on her health and comfort. Dental pain in the Elizabethan era was acute, chronic, and often untreated. Extraction was rudimentary and performed without anesthesia, and cavities could become infected, leading to fevers and systemic illness. Elizabeth's use of perfumed gloves and careful positioning to conceal her teeth was not simply about vanity. It was a daily management of discomfort, pain, and the ongoing need to project perfection. The interplay between indulgence and image management demonstrates the broader theme of Elizabeth's life. Every choice in pursuit of appearance, status, or control came with a cost, sometimes immediate, sometimes hidden, but always present. Her dental decay became a metaphor for the hidden dangers beneath the splendor of court life, an imperceptible erosion that mirrored the slow, invisible effects of her lead-based makeup, mercury-laden rouge, and arsenic-laced powders. Moreover, sugar itself symbolized more than personal taste. It was intertwined with power, colonial trade, and the assertion of authority. Elizabeth's consumption of sugar was a reminder of the reach of her court, the global networks of trade that underpinned her wealth, and the labor of distant peoples who harvested, processed, and transported this precious commodity. Every sweet consumed carried the weight of empire, labor, and the fragility of her own body. Her decayed teeth were thus not merely an individual consequence, but a reflection of the interconnected nature of power, indulgence, and risk in Elizabethan England. The impact of Elizabeth's dental condition also influenced court etiquette, social interactions, and the very culture of observation that pervaded Whitehall. Visitors, diplomats, and courtiers learned to navigate her proximity carefully, aware of the scents that accompanied her presence and the subtle signals of imperfection she carefully masked. Her teeth, unseen but potent in effect, shaped conversations, seating arrangements, and the choreography of courtly appearances. Even portraitists were instructed to idealize her smile, hiding the reality while enhancing the aura of perfection and youth that was central to her political and personal authority. In this way, the decay of her teeth exemplifies the constant tension between the visible image of monarchy and the hidden, often uncomfortable truths that underlay it. Thus, the tale of Elizabeth's teeth, the sweet curse of sugar, and the courtly practices that surrounded them illustrates the complex interplay between luxury, danger, and image. Her rot hidden behind perfumed gloves and carefully positioned smiles became a symbol of the costs of power, the extremes of beauty, and the meticulous, sometimes perilous measures taken to maintain control over perception. Even as she aged and her body bore the evidence of indulgence and chemical exposure, Elizabeth's teeth remained a quiet but potent emblem of the Elizabethan obsession with appearance, a reminder that beneath every layer of powdered face and scented perfume lay the fragile, imperfect human being, the Queen herself, sustaining her image at the cost of her own health and well-being. In the courtly glare of Whitehall, where every gesture was watched and every appearance scrutinized, the hidden decay behind Elizabeth's smile serves as a testament to the lethal elegance and relentless performance that defined one of England's most fascinating sovereigns. The scented gloves and handkerchiefs. The story of Elizabeth I's intricate and perilous approach to personal hygiene and beauty would be incomplete without an examination of the scented gloves and handkerchiefs that formed an essential part of her daily ritual. Following the tale of her decayed teeth and the masked sweetness of her sugar-laden indulgences, these accessories emerge not merely as tools of adornment, but as instruments of concealment, both practical and symbolic, intricately woven into the performance of power and appearance that defined her reign. In the court of Elizabeth I, where every movement, gesture, and scent was scrutinized, these objects carried significance far beyond their immediate utility. The gloves of the Virgin Queen were far from ordinary. They were meticulously soaked and imbued with a complex mixture of oils and fragrances, each chosen with deliberate care. Jasmine, with its soft and subtly intoxicating aroma, imbued the gloves with a sense of delicate elegance. Orange blossom added a fresh and uplifting note, while ambergris, rare and precious, lent a deep, earthy undertone that was both commanding and refined. To the casual observer, these gloves were beautiful accessories, matching the Queen's elaborate gowns and layered ensembles. But to those who understood the court's intricate choreography of scent and perception, they were much more than decoration. They were tools to manage the realities of her body and the omnipresent awareness of decay and imperfection. Elizabeth's hands, though often delicate in appearance, were in truth an area of vulnerability. Years of handling toxic cosmetics, lead-based powders, and arsenic-laden creams had taken their toll. Tremors were not uncommon, subtle shakes that could betray the underlying effects of the chemical onslaught that she subjected herself to, in pursuit of an image of eternal youth and unblemished beauty. The scented gloves served as a buffer, concealing these imperfections and maintaining the illusion of composure. Every handshake, every gesture of politeness, every ceremonial touch was mediated by this fragrant barrier. The oils and perfumes did more than mask odors. They also masked the imperfections, the frailties, and the small betrayals of time and toxicity that threatened to reveal themselves through her hands. Handkerchiefs, similarly, were saturated with fragrances, and they played a dual role in Elizabeth's complex hygienic performance. Not only were they used to dab at her skin or wipe away unwanted sweat, but they were also discreetly held to cover her mouth during moments when her decayed teeth or foul breath might otherwise have betrayed her meticulous effort to preserve a flawless image. The handkerchiefs absorbed and released their scents in a subtle, almost theatrical manner, ensuring that the air around the Queen carried the aura of refinement and divinity she meticulously curated. They were small, portable, and intensely personal tools, linking the sensory experience of the court directly to the Queen's will and her ability to command presence. The use of scented gloves and handkerchiefs also had a broader symbolic dimension. They reflected the Elizabethan court's obsession with scent as a marker of social hierarchy and political loyalty. Courtiers who wished to demonstrate alignment with the Queen's tastes would acquire and use similar scented gloves and handkerchiefs, emulating her olfactory signature. In this way, fragrance became a language in itself, signaling allegiance, refinement, and understanding of courtly etiquette. It was not merely a matter of masking odor. It was a means of navigating the complex social hierarchies and power dynamics of Whitehall. The Queen's scent was reproduced, mirrored, and interpreted by those around her, extending her influence into every gesture, every whisper, and every encounter. Yet the reliance on these scented accessories also illustrates the precariousness of Elizabeth's approach to beauty and hygiene. The gloves and handkerchiefs were compensatory devices, designed to hide and manage the consequences of years of chemical exposure, inadequate bathing, and the relentless pursuit of an unattainable ideal. Their use underscores the tension between appearance and reality in the Queen's life, Each fragrant layer was both protective and performative, a delicate mask over the frailty and vulnerability that lay beneath her courtly veneer. The very act of saturating these items with perfumes was a recognition of the inevitable decay of the human body, a concession that beauty, while powerful, was ultimately fragile and temporary. In addition, these scented objects served to influence perception not only through smell, but also through the subtle dynamics of touch. A queen's handshake, a gentle pat on the shoulder, a casual brush against a courtier's arm, all these interactions carried the carefully curated aroma of power. It was impossible to separate the social, political, and physical effects of the gloves and handkerchiefs. They mediated experience, altered reality, and controlled how others experienced her presence. In a court where every detail was scrutinized, where missteps could have political ramifications, and where the smallest indication of human frailty could be leveraged against her, these scented accessories became instruments of survival as much as symbols of beauty. The labor involved in maintaining these scented items was itself remarkable. Servants and attendants were tasked with carefully refreshing the oils and perfumes, ensuring that the gloves and handkerchiefs retained their potency throughout the day. The preparation was meticulous, involving knowledge of the proper combinations, the longevity of scent, and the timing of application. Each morning, as Elizabeth dressed, these items were integrated into her ensemble with precision, coordinated with her powders, rouge, and wigs, forming an inseparable part of her total presentation. The process was ceremonial, intimate, and crucial, reflecting a deep understanding that her personal scent was a cornerstone of her power, influence, and command over those around her. In the end, the story of Elizabeth's scented gloves and handkerchiefs is a vivid illustration of the intricate interplay between beauty, health, and power in the Elizabethan court. These objects, saturated with fragrance, concealed physical decay, masked vulnerability, and extended the Queen's presence into every corner of her social world. They were practical tools for survival in a world of toxic cosmetics, social scrutiny, and political intrigue. Yet they also symbolized the performative nature of her reign, where every gesture, touch, and scent was orchestrated to maintain authority, impress courtiers, and reinforce the myth of the Virgin Queen. The gloves and handkerchiefs, in their quiet, fragrant manner, reveal the complex, often perilous, artistry of appearance that defined Elizabeth's life, reminding us that beneath every layer of powder and perfume lay a human being navigating a world where beauty was both weapon and vulnerability, a mask that shielded her from the world while subtly bearing the cost of power itself. The court imitates the Queen. The influence of Queen Elizabeth I on her court was profound, far beyond the political or military, extending into every aspect of daily life, every gesture, and every detail of appearance. Following the intimate tale of her scented gloves and handkerchiefs, one begins to understand not only how she managed her own image, but also how her personal rituals shaped the behaviors, habits, and very survival strategies of those around her. Elizabeth's presence was magnetic, a force that could not be ignored, and her habits, whether practical, aesthetic, or toxic, radiated outward, commanding imitation and devotion from her courtiers. The court, in essence, became a reflection of the Queen herself, a living theater where beauty, health, and appearance were performance, obedience, and loyalty all at once. From the moment Elizabeth entered a room, her courtiers were acutely aware of every element of her presentation. The Queen's pale, meticulously powdered skin, the vermilion of her lips, the gleam of her lead-laden white foundation, the crimson blush applied with mercury-infused rouge, and the subtle, intoxicating aura of jasmine, ambergris, and orange blossom from her gloves and handkerchiefs. All these signals were observed and analyzed by those who wished to survive, thrive, or gain favor. In Elizabethan England, to ignore the Queen's mannerisms or scent would be a political misstep, an unspoken breach of protocol that could cost reputation, opportunity, or even life. To emulate her was not merely flattery, it was a survival tactic, a demonstration of alignment with her power, and a symbol of loyalty that transcended mere words. The imitation began with skin, the most visible and scrutinized aspect of appearance. Noble women of the court, observing Elizabeth's ghostly visage, embarked on their own campaigns of pallor. Venetian ceruse, that deadly white lead and vinegar mixture, became a staple on their faces, applied generously to achieve the same inhumanly flawless complexion that the Queen wore so carefully. Layers of powders were meticulously dusted over the cheeks, nose, and forehead, creating an ethereal mask, one that betrayed neither age nor imperfection. Mothers instructed daughters in the dangerous art of lead-based cosmetics. Apprentices learned the precise timing and mixing of powders, and every application was a silent affirmation of allegiance. Skin became not only a canvas for beauty, but a visible testament to loyalty. The whiter the face, the closer the devotion to Elizabeth herself. Yet beneath these layers, women were poisoning themselves slowly, enduring skin sores, rashes, and long-term health consequences, all in service to an image of perfection dictated from above. The lips, red and vibrant with mercury-laced rouge, were copied meticulously. Every courtesan and lady-in-waiting sought to replicate the Queen's iconic vermilion hue. This toxic obsession was not merely aesthetic, it was performative. A pale face without the crimson accent appeared incomplete, insufficiently devoted, or even presumptuous. Courtiers went to great lengths to prepare vermilion, grinding minerals, blending them with oils, and applying them with painstaking care. The lips, a sign of vitality and fervor, became symbolic weapons in the social battlefield of court life. Tremors and faint ailments caused by the mercury-infused products were quietly endured, hidden behind gloves and handkerchiefs, yet visible only to those who knew how to look for the subtle signs of suffering. In mimicking the Queen, the courtiers embraced the peril of beauty as an unspoken pact of service. Hair, too, became a focal point of imitation. Elizabeth's own red gold tresses, vibrant even as she aged, were considered divine, a reflection of her fiery intellect and eternal authority. Courtiers, eager to mirror this emblem of power, subjected themselves to perilous practices, bleaching with lye and even urine, creating burns, scalp injuries, and hair loss, all to achieve a color and texture reminiscent of the Virgin Queen. Wigs, often powdered with lead dust to appear lighter and more regal, were donned with pride. Courtiers spent hours meticulously styling, teasing, and adjusting their hairpieces, understanding that a single misstep could indicate disrespect or incompetence. Hair, like skin and lips, became both a tool and a trap, an outward display of loyalty, intertwined with hidden suffering and silent endurance. Perfume, that intoxicating, enveloping aura that Elizabeth carried like armor, became a compulsory element for those at court. Rose, ambergris, musk, and orange blossom scented the air around every noblewoman, creating a haze that mirrored the Queen's own olfactory signature. Those who neglected to emulate the Queen's scent risked being noticed, seen as failing to demonstrate devotion, and potentially removed from the circles of favor. Perfume, layered over powders and rouge, masked the inevitable odors of decaying cosmetics, unwashed skin, and the close quarters of court life. The court became a theater of fragrance, each individual scent signaling position, power, and compliance with the queen's invisible hierarchy. The ritual extended beyond appearance into movement, gesture, and etiquette. Ladies adjusted their posture, their expressions, and their mannerisms to replicate Elizabeth's grace, composure, and measured conduct. Every handshake, curtsy, and bow became part of an intricate performance, synchronized with visual and olfactory cues to form a coherent imitation of the queen herself. These behaviors were observed, judged, and rewarded by the queen and her inner circle, reinforcing the expectation of absolute fidelity to her image in every conceivable form. Even the servants, cooks, and lower-ranking attendants joined this mimicry. Their gloves were scented, their clothing brushed and perfumed, and their movements calibrated to echo the rhythms of their sovereign. The palace itself became a living organism of imitation, a network of scents, colors, and gestures, all aligning to sustain the myth and presence of Elizabeth I. Every corridor, every chamber, and every audience with the queen was a stage, where the performance of loyalty and devotion extended the queen's authority beyond her immediate actions and words. Yet this perfection came at immense cost. The court was a space where beauty equaled survival, and to survive meant to endure toxic powders, poisonous makeup, burns, and slow, invisible damage to the body. It was a court built on layered death, hidden beneath surfaces of charm, grace, and sophistication. Every mimicry of the queen's habits was an acceptance of risk, a silent agreement to sacrifice health, comfort, and sometimes sanity in order to maintain one's place within her carefully curated realm. The result was a glittering, perfumed, lead-laden court that appeared vibrant and healthy to outsiders, but was internally marked by suffering, decay, and relentless pressure. Elizabeth's influence had transformed personal hygiene and beauty into a form of allegiance, embedding the dangerous rituals of toxic cosmetics into the daily lives of those who wished to maintain proximity to power. The court, in its totality, became both homage and hazard, a living testament to the compelling, sometimes cruel power of imitation, where the pursuit of perfection and loyalty blurred the line between survival, devotion, and self-destruction, leaving an enduring legacy of fascination, dread, and the unforgettable scent of the Virgin Queen's reign. The psychological cost of beauty. The court of Elizabeth I, resplendent in its finery, glittering jewels, and flickering candlelight, was more than a stage for political maneuvering. It was a theater in which the very essence of human frailty and ambition played out in the guise of beauty. Following the intricate rituals of powdered faces, vermilion lips, lead-laden wigs, and perfumed gloves, one begins to perceive not merely the visual spectacle of Elizabeth's reign, but the profound psychological landscape that underpinned every gesture, every application of rouge, and every layer of toxic powder. Here, the pursuit of beauty was not a trivial indulgence. It was an all-consuming necessity, an armor forged against the relentless scrutiny of society and the inexorable march of time. Within this framework of glittering surfaces and hidden poisons, one discovers the psychological cost of beauty, a cost that affected the queen, her courtiers, and the very culture that venerated her image. Elizabeth herself lived in perpetual consciousness of her own image, a psychological tension that shaped every moment of her waking hours. Beneath the bright, ghostly pallor of her ceruse foundation and the fiery red of her rouge lay a profound anxiety, one born of an awareness that beauty was inseparable from power. To appear aged, flawed, or less than perfect was not simply a matter of vanity, it was a potential threat to her authority, a fissure in the carefully constructed myth of the Virgin Queen. This anxiety was compounded by the physical toll exacted by the substances she applied daily. Lead, mercury, arsenic, and other toxic ingredients slowly eroded her health, yet she persisted, layering powder upon powder, rouge upon rouge, hair upon hair, in an almost ritualistic defiance of mortality. The psychological burden was immense. Each day's preparation became an act of both self-preservation and self-enslavement, a meticulous performance requiring constant vigilance and acute awareness of every detail. For those within her court, the pressure to emulate the queen amplified these anxieties. Noble women, striving to mirror Elizabeth's ghostly complexion, her fiery hair, and her intoxicating scent, subjected themselves to the same toxic powders, perfumes, and bleaching treatments, fully aware of the danger yet compelled by social expectation. The court's hierarchy was enforced not merely through protocol and ceremony, but through appearance itself. Whiter skin, more vibrant lips, meticulously styled hair, and an intoxicating personal fragrance were signals of loyalty, refinement, and ambition. Those who failed to achieve the queen's standard risked marginalization, derision, or even exclusion from influential circles. The psychological strain was omnipresent, an invisible specter hovering over every reflection, every gesture, every morning's preparation. The obsession with preserving youth and beauty in the court was a mirror to the era's deeper anxieties. Mortality was an omnipresent shadow in Elizabethan England, and the threat of disease, premature death, and social irrelevance loomed over all. The beauty rituals, poisonous though they were, offered a fragile illusion of control over these uncontrollable forces. By applying ceruse, rouge, and perfumed oils, Elizabeth and her courtiers enacted a daily ritual of defiance, a symbolic battle against decay, aging, and oblivion. Each stroke of powder or pigment became a meditation on mortality, a negotiation between the corporeal body and the imperatives of perception. The psychological cost was profound. Women spent hours confronting their own vulnerabilities, encoding their fear into layers of hazardous cosmetics, and internalizing the ever-present judgment of the court and the public. Moreover, the court's obsession with replicating the queen's beauty created a feedback loop of anxiety and competition. Every glance in a mirror, every examination of a rival's attire, every sniff of a competing perfume became a moment of silent evaluation. Anxiety was transmitted through subtle signals, a slightly imperfect application of rouge, a hint of discoloration in a powder, or even the scent of human perspiration insufficiently masked by fragrance. The performance of beauty was also a performance of social positioning. To falter in appearance was to falter in influence. The psychological toll was both intimate and pervasive, reaching into private chambers where women continued their rituals alone, aware that even unseen, the court's gaze lingered through the standards established by the queen. Elizabeth's own psychological engagement with her beauty routines was complex. Her obsessive application of cosmetics was not simply a superficial vanity. It was an instrument of power, a shield against vulnerability, and a tool to impose control over the court. Each morning's ritual was a choreography of dominance, a declaration of unassailable authority encoded in whitened skin, vermilion lips, and perfumed gloves. Yet the process was inseparable from suffering. Nausea from arsenic-laced powders, tremors induced by mercury, skin sores from lead foundation. The paradox of the court, the convergence of intoxicating power and insidious self-damage, manifested as a constant psychological negotiation to appear invincible, while concealing the corporeal consequences of that invincibility. In addition to the self-inflicted psychological pressure, the court's culture reinforced these anxieties collectively. Imitation of the queen's beauty was mandatory. Deviation invited censure or loss of influence. Apprentices, attendants, and courtiers internalized the queen's standards as absolute truths, embedding a system of fear and expectation that was reinforced through gossip, observation, and ritualized displays of fidelity. The psychological weight was cumulative. Each act of imitation reaffirmed the dangers of the cosmetics, the fragility of health, and the centrality of appearance to survival within the court. Women lived in a perpetual state of preparation and evaluation, a heightened awareness that any lapse could jeopardize status, favor, or even safety. Even beyond the court, the obsession with beauty influenced wider social norms and perceptions. The queen's toxic beauty rituals trickled down through the nobility, shaping expectations of propriety, hygiene, and femininity across England. The psychological cost extended beyond the palace walls. Women in towns and villages, aspiring to replicate the image of the Virgin Queen, endured their own small-scale rituals of powders, rouge, and perfumed oils, often at considerable risk to health. The pursuit of beauty became inseparable from social survival, a lesson in how societal pressures and ideals can dictate personal behavior, even to the point of harm. The anxiety encoded into Elizabeth's beauty routines thus became a pervasive, generational phenomenon, illustrating the intimate and far-reaching consequences of cultural obsession with appearance. Elizabeth's beauty, once understood as a symbol of strength, divinity, and control, was simultaneously a source of profound psychological burden. Each application of poison-laden powder, each stroke of rouge, each inhalation of scented oils carried the weight of expectation, the threat of mortality, and the awareness of social surveillance. In maintaining her image, Elizabeth imposed upon herself and her court a regime of discipline and fear, a daily negotiation between power, mortality, and perception. The psychological cost was immense, a silent but persistent force shaping behavior, loyalty, and identity. In the end, the pursuit of beauty in Elizabethan England was never merely cosmetic. It was a perilous, all-encompassing performance, intertwining vanity, politics, mortality, and the relentless weight of expectation into a tapestry of slow, intoxicating, and sometimes deadly devotion. The slow poisoning of a nation, the pursuit of beauty in Elizabethan England, so carefully curated within the royal court, did not remain confined to the grand halls of Whitehall or the gilded chambers of noble estates. What began as the Virgin Queen's meticulously maintained image and her court's obsessive rituals of powders, rouges, perfumes, and arsenic-laden creams eventually extended far beyond the palace walls, seeping into the lives of merchants, middle-class women, and anyone who aspired to emulate the aesthetic ideals of the age. The slow diffusion of these beauty practices transformed them from exclusive markers of status and power into widespread instruments of silent harm. As the toxic recipes that created Elizabeth's iconic pallor and her courtiers' glowing, vermilion-lipped faces spread through Europe, carried in handwritten guides, shared secrets, and the imitation that passed from court to city, from town to village. It was a diffusion of culture that, though celebrated for its elegance and refinement, carried with it an insidious consequence: the slow poisoning of an entire nation. At the heart of this epidemic of vanity were the very substances that had sustained the Queen's public image. Venetian ceruse, a mixture of white lead and vinegar, was no longer merely a cosmetic marvel for the elite. It became a coveted elixir for anyone who wished to appear pale, noble, or socially elevated. Housewives, seamstresses, apothecaries, and young women in the middle classes began to prepare their own versions of these deadly formulas. mixing powders, grinding minerals, and blending mercury into rouge, just as they had observed or learned from travelers and printed almanacs. Each recipe carried explicit instructions for achieving the ethereal, ghostly skin tone and blood-red lips that the court had made fashionable. Yet, unlike the queen, most of these women lacked the subtle understanding of moderation, the knowledge of careful layering, or the experience to recognize early signs of poisoning. They applied these powders morning and night, day after day, believing themselves to be pursuing beauty, unaware that the very rituals they cherished were gradually corroding their health from the inside. The consequences of this emulation were profound and tragic. Skin began to crack, flake, and ulcerate under the constant assault of lead and arsenic. Hair thinned and fell from repeated bleaching attempts, and powdered wigs dusted with metallic compounds. Nails weakened, tremors crept into fingers and hands, and fatigue, vertigo, and digestive ailments became common companions to those who maintained these regimes. Among the upper middle class and the aspiring bourgeoisie, the obsession with courtly beauty standards created a population simultaneously enthralled by elegance and debilitated by it, a paradox in which the very tools meant to signify vitality and health slowly sapped it away. Mortality, once a distant concern, now lingered as a quiet, invisible threat in every powder puff, brush, and cosmetic vial. Apothecaries, eager to profit from the new demand, disseminated recipes and prepared potions that promised flawless skin, sparkling eyes, and youthful complexions. These preparations, often sold at considerable expense, contained the same toxins that had been the hallmark of the court. Lead-based creams, mercury-infused rouge, and arsenic-containing brighteners were packaged as luxury items, with their dangers either understated or ignored entirely. For many households, the line between health and harm blurred. The very pursuit of elegance became an inadvertent wager with mortality. Families watched daughters and wives succumb to tremors, ulcers, and fatigue, attributing these ailments to natural frailty or spiritual imbalance, rather than to the powders and pastes they applied religiously each day. Thus, the beauty rituals of Elizabethan England extended the Queen's influence far beyond political or cultural matters. They imposed a literal, slow-acting physical cost on an unsuspecting populace. Even as the dangers became apparent to a few learned physicians or observant neighbors, the allure of social mobility and the pressure to emulate the court ensured that these practices continued unabated. Pale skin, bright lips, and immaculate powdered hair remained visual shorthand for refinement, virtue, and prosperity. The social implications were powerful. To refuse the treatments was to risk derision, exclusion, or the perception of inferiority. Girls learned from mothers, mothers from aunts or female mentors, and each generation inherited both the techniques and the hidden poisons. In this way, the aesthetic values of a single queen shaped an entire society, dictating the routines, expectations, and ultimately the vulnerabilities of women across cities, towns, and even the rural periphery of England and beyond. The slow poisoning was not limited to immediate physical health. It affected the psychological and social fabric as well. Women internalized anxiety about appearance and mortality, measuring their self-worth against an impossible standard. They learned to endure discomfort, neglect bodily signals of illness, and mask the symptoms of toxicity behind layers of perfume and powder. In this landscape, beauty was synonymous with vigilance, fear, and endurance. Each application was both a declaration of refinement and an act of silent self-endangerment. The pursuit of elegance demanded suffering, and that suffering became normalized, institutionalized, and ritualized across society. This epidemic of vanity and toxicity illustrates the profound reach of Elizabeth's influence. It was not merely a matter of aesthetic preference, but a cultural contagion, transmitted through imitation, commerce, and the unspoken pressures of societal hierarchy. Over time, the cumulative impact became clear. Entire communities were unwittingly complicit in practices that damaged health, reduced lifespan, and instilled a pervasive anxiety about the body and its presentation. What began as an emblem of royal beauty evolved into a collective, systemic hazard, the consequences of which echoed through generations. In this light, the story of Elizabethan cosmetics serves as a haunting example of how the pursuit of beauty, when intertwined with social expectation and unexamined authority, can extend its influence far beyond the intended sphere. It was a world in which desire, envy, and emulation created a silent epidemic, a world where the aesthetic ideals of one queen slowly, inexorably poisoned the bodies and spirits of an entire nation. Every powder, paste, and perfumed layer carried both the promise of elegance and the peril of death, a duality that defined the Elizabethan era and cemented its reputation as a time of breathtaking beauty and hidden peril, a historical narrative of glamour and suffering intertwined in the most intimate of daily rituals. The Mask and the Mirror, the final years. The final years of Queen Elizabeth I's reign present one of the most haunting chapters in the history of beauty, power, and human endurance. By this time, the Virgin Queen had ascended to an age where the ravages of time, compounded by decades of toxic cosmetics, began to take their undeniable toll. The layers of lead-based ceruse, mercury-laced rouge, and arsenic-laden brighteners that once conferred an aura of divine radiance had left their marks, etched into her skin in lines, scars, and discolorations that no amount of perfumed powder could entirely conceal. Yet, as always, Elizabeth remained committed to the meticulous performance of her appearance, for to abandon it would be to risk her authority, her legend, and the carefully constructed mythology of the Virgin Queen. Each morning in her private chambers, she confronted the mirror not merely as a reflection, but as a site of negotiation between mortality and myth. The mirror, cold and unyielding, reflected a face both venerable and violated, a landscape of decades of cosmetic ritual, a living canvas layered with poison and artifice. She was, in effect, both artist and artwork, but the medium of her craft was slow-acting toxins that had insidiously begun to consume the very flesh they were meant to embellish. Avoidance of mirrors became a defining characteristic of her final years. There were chambers in Whitehall where Elizabeth would barely linger, where gilded glass and polished surfaces were seen as temptations to compare herself to the youthful ideal she had projected for so long. To confront the reflection was to confront the limits of control, the inevitability of decay, and the fragility of her carefully curated persona. Yet, paradoxically, Elizabeth never abandoned the rituals themselves. Each day began with the intricate layering of powders, the precise application of rouge and vermilion, the blending of mercury-laden treatments into her cheeks and lips. Servants, skilled in the delicate manipulations required to achieve the courtly illusion of flawless skin, worked tirelessly, tending to her every brushstroke and dusting of powder. In these moments, Elizabeth enacted her daily performance, an unbroken chain of ritual that spanned decades. It was a quiet assertion of sovereignty over time, over the body, and over perception itself. She understood, more acutely than ever, that her image was inseparable from her authority. To appear mortal, to reveal the underlying deterioration, was to risk more than vanity. It was to imperil the mystique that sustained her power over courtiers, subjects, and foreign dignitaries alike. The ritualistic application of cosmetics in her final years was both deliberate and desperate. Each powdered contour, each vermilion-tinted lip, each perfumed veil of scent was a shield against the reality of aging and a weapon against the political dangers of perceived weakness. The Queen's attendants, who had observed her transformation over decades, noted the precision with which she maintained her routine. Even as tremors, the faint tremor of hands weakened by long-term mercury exposure, and the subtle sag of skin beneath layers of powder threatened to betray the artifice, Elizabeth remained unflinching. Her face, though concealed under a mask of makeup, became a battleground in which vanity, authority, and survival converged. Each cosmetic decision carried consequences, and yet she persisted, layering one dangerous substance atop another, knowing that her radiance, though chemical in origin, continued to symbolize her untouchable status. The interplay of fear and ambition defined Elizabeth's private life in these years. She knew that the court's perception of her was inextricably linked to her appearance, and she meticulously curated every public and private interaction to preserve the image of vitality. The few moments when she permitted herself solitude were devoted not to rest from her rituals, but to recommit to them, adjusting the placement of lead-based powder, assessing the depth of rouge, and ensuring that every strand of hair, often powdered with lead dust itself, was positioned to create an effect of youthful splendor. Mirrors were consulted sparingly, not to observe decay, but to perfect illusion, to ensure that the face presented to the world would continue to embody the myth of the eternal queen. Elizabeth's final public appearances exemplified the paradox of her existence. The spectacle of radiance, entirely artificial, masking the corporeal consequences of decades of cosmetic warfare against her own body. Attendants recount that the Queen's visage, in its last orchestrated display, radiated a ghostly brilliance. She moved through the hallways with the elegance and poise that had always defined her reign. And yet, beneath the powdered mask, beneath the vermilion and ceruse, her flesh bore the subtle signatures of long-term poisoning. The ceremonial dress, the glittering jewels, and the perfumed aura completed the illusion. A sovereign untouchable in beauty, impervious to age, commanding respect and awe. The performance was flawless, yet every gesture, every powdered smile, was underwritten by a slow, inexorable biological decline. The very substances that had enabled her reign's aesthetic dominance were now agents of decay, silently etching the toll of power and vanity into the Queen's body. In this final interplay of beauty and mortality, Elizabeth's mask became a metaphor for her era. Her visage was both shield and shroud, concealing the vulnerabilities that were never to be publicly acknowledged. The whitened face, the fiery hair carefully arranged, the lips glowing with vermilion all signified authority, divinity, and control over perception. Yet the same elements were corrosive, emblematic of a world where the pursuit of perfection came at a lethal cost. Each layer of makeup, each ritualized application, was a testament to human ingenuity, obsession, and the paradoxical relationship between image and existence. To maintain the facade of eternal youth, Elizabeth had waged a silent war against her own body, a war that left her simultaneously immortalized in portraiture and imperiled in flesh. Even in death, the symbolism of her final years endured. The Queen, who had commanded armies, diplomacy, and a kingdom's allegiance, had also mastered the delicate art of personal illusion. Her beauty, painstakingly curated through the application of toxic substances, remained a narrative of both triumph and tragedy. It reflected a society in which appearance dictated authority, in which scent and hue were inseparable from power, and in which the quest for perfection exacted its inevitable toll. Elizabeth's final visage was a living commentary on the inseparability of aesthetics and authority, of vanity and vulnerability, of human ambition and human fragility. The mask she wore until her final days consumed her, yet it ensured that the legend of the Virgin Queen would endure. Her image immortalized in collective memory as both an icon of power and a cautionary tale about the dangers that lie beneath the allure of beauty. This was a queen who transformed the act of self-presentation into an instrument of sovereignty, who made poison into polish, and who allowed the world to see only what she desired. Every line, every scar, every tremor concealed beneath layers of ceruse and rouge spoke of the price paid for perceived perfection. The Elizabethan age, with its obsession for pale skin, perfect features, and seductive scent, found its ultimate expression in the last years of its most iconic monarch. And so, the narrative of the Virgin Queen's final visage remains a compelling story of human desire, power, and the intertwining of beauty and mortality, an enduring testament to the extraordinary lengths to which one will go to control not only their image, but the perception of their very soul. As the candlelight flickers across the shadowed chambers of Elizabethan England in your mind's eye, one begins to see not merely a queen adorned in ceremonial splendor, but a symbol of the eternal struggle between vanity, mortality, and human ambition. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, who reigned with a composure and authority that has echoed through the centuries, was a master of perception. Her alabaster skin, vivid red hair, and meticulously applied rouge were not mere personal indulgences. They were instruments of power, shields against both time and political adversaries. Yet for all their beauty, these external trappings were inseparable from the hidden toll they exacted. The powders that brightened her face contained lead. The rouge that painted her lips vibrant with life was steeped in mercury. The creams that promised youth were laced with arsenic. Each ritual of self-adornment was a quiet act of self-destruction, and each layer of perfume or powder a deliberate concealment of decay. In this world, beauty was never innocent. It was a gamble, a calculated risk taken in full awareness that the stakes were life itself. The paradox of Elizabeth's existence lies in the duality of her appearance. To her subjects and the court, she was the embodiment of grace, power, and untouchable perfection. Every smile, every powdered gesture, every flash of ruby lips signaled dominance and control. Yet beneath the surface, the effects of centuries of cosmetic regimens were manifest in scars, cracks, and subtle signs of toxicity. Her visage was a map of endurance, of persistence against the inevitable forces of time and mortality. To gaze upon Elizabeth was to witness a complex negotiation. The body betrayed the passage of decades, but the careful orchestration of lead, mercury, and powder maintained the illusion of eternal youth. Each morning, the Queen's rituals were performed with the precision of a sovereign preparing for battle. The brushstrokes of ceruse were measured and deliberate. The application of rouge and vermilion was exacting, almost ceremonial. Perfume, layered upon skin, hair, and clothing, became a fragrant armor against both scent and mortality. The very air of Whitehall, thick with aromatic musk and rosewater, was a testament to the meticulous orchestration of image, masking not just odor, but the inevitable decline of the flesh beneath. Elizabeth's obsession with beauty, however, was not a private indulgence. It radiated outward, affecting her court, her nation, and the cultural imagination for centuries to come. Courtiers imitated her every cosmetic ritual, soaking gloves in perfumed oils, brushing powders onto faces, and replicating the delicate blush of rouge upon their own cheeks. These practices were not merely aesthetic. They were acts of loyalty, survival, and political strategy. To mirror the queen's appearance was to align oneself with her power, to signal adherence to the invisible hierarchies she controlled with every gesture, every scented breath. Perfume became a political language, powdered skin a declaration of status, and adherence to her beauty codes a demonstration of allegiance. The social fabric of Elizabethan England was, in part, woven from these rituals, a fragrant theater in which every participant performed a role scripted by the Queen's image. Yet this theater came at a tangible human cost. Tremors, skin lesions, and poisoning spread slowly through the upper echelons, and the imitation by courtiers meant that the shadow of toxicity extended far beyond the Queen herself. The pursuit of beauty had become a silent epidemic, a communal devotion to illusion that carried with it the hidden weight of mortality. When we reflect on this era from our modern vantage point, there is both awe and unease. We marvel at Elizabeth's mastery of image, her ability to craft a presence so commanding that it has resonated across centuries. Yet there is a profound human lesson in the cost of this mastery. In Elizabeth's court, appearance was inseparable from survival, from power, from the exercise of sovereignty. Each brushstroke, each application of perfumed powder was a strategic act designed to sustain authority and to protect the body politic she represented. And yet, as we consider the toxins, the decay, and the slow, invisible poisoning that accompanied these practices, we are reminded that the human desire for perfection is timeless, and that the pursuit of beauty has always carried consequences. The Virgin Queen's world was one in which vanity and mortality danced in an intricate, often perilous ballet, where the external mask could conceal inner frailty, and where the scent of roses and ambergris was both a shield and a shroud. Even today, the echoes of Elizabethan obsession with appearance reverberate through our culture. Modern cosmetics are safer, scientific understanding is more advanced, and hygiene is regulated by standards unimaginable in the 16th century. And yet, the human longing for youth, flawlessness, and aesthetic control remains. We too layer substances upon our skin, dye our hair, and curate our scent not with mercury or arsenic, but with the pursuit of idealized beauty nonetheless. Elizabeth's legacy serves as a cautionary mirror, reflecting both the ingenuity and the folly of human striving. Her story reminds us that the image we present can be as powerful as the reality it conceals, and that behind every carefully maintained facade lies a complex interplay of ambition, fear, and mortality. So tonight, as you drift into the quiet embrace of sleep, consider the Virgin Queen beneath her powdered mask, radiant yet fragile, commanding yet slowly eroded by the very beauty that defined her. Her perfumes, her rouge, her alabaster complexion, they were tools of power, instruments of perception, and instruments of slow decay. Beneath every crown, every layer of paint, every fragrant veil, lies the persistent truth of humanity. We are both magnificent and mortal, shrouded in our rituals, yet ever subject to time. If this story has lulled you into the strange, sleepy corners of history, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Tell us in the comments what peculiar or astonishing beauty secrets of history fascinate you the most. Tonight, let the tale of Elizabeth I's splendor, her ritualized vanity, and her intimate dance with mortality accompany you into a world of dreams where history breathes softly, where crowns glimmer under candlelight, and where every scent carries a story of power, ambition, and human fragility.